LinkedIn News.
It's a privilege to understand who you are, and our systems are at war. It's an economy of attention. They want our attention, but I need my attention. That's not selfish. That's not being self-centered. It's learning to center myself. It's learning to come from an authentic place in my life. If you made learning what makes you happy your number one priority in your life, your whole life would change.
That's four-time Grammy-nominated singer-songwriter Jewel. I'm Leah Smart, and this is Everyday Better. May is Mental Health Awareness Month. Here at Everyday Better, we are always striving to take care of our overall well-being, but that includes our mental health, whether that be at home, at work, or in our relationships. So all month, we're focusing on some of the most common, yet least understood mental health challenges. We'll be getting into the science of panic attacks with ABC News' chief national correspondent, Matt Gutman. We'll also explore our addiction to dopamine with scientist and best-selling author Anna Lembke. But to kick things off, I have a really special guest in store for you. I am so excited for you to hear Jewel's mental health journey. It's a story that I know will stick with me forever. We'll be back in just a few moments. Hey everyone, from LinkedIn News, I'm Leah Smart, and this is Everyday Better, a personal development podcast where every week I sit down with some of the world's brightest minds and bravest hearts who use science and story to share strategies for how we can flourish individually in relationship to others and to the world around us. As regular listeners of the show will know, I recently gave birth to my first baby. And as I adjust to my new life as a mom, my lovely producers, Grace and Emily, are helping me out. I'm going to let them take over for just a few moments, and then I'll be back with you for the rest of the show.
I know that when I think about improving my mental health, the images that come to mind are things like going for a walk, journaling, and long bubble baths. And don't get me wrong, I love those things. But I think at the heart of every journey towards better mental health is actually something much deeper. A quiet yet radical commitment we make to ourselves. We may never announce it to the world or even say it out loud, but this commitment to growth, self-worth, and inner peace can change everything. Our guest today is Jewel Kilcher, but you may know her simply as Jewel, and her story is a testament to that very choice. It's a reminder that healing, even in the most difficult circumstances, is not only possible, it's something we can learn and practice.
A four-time Grammy nominee, Jewel is a singer-songwriter whose genre-spanning albums have sold over 30 million copies worldwide. She burst onto the scene at age 21 with the release of her folk album Pieces of You, which went 12 times platinum in the US alone and became one of the best-selling debut albums of all time. Throughout her career, Jewel has refused to play by the music industry's rules, shifting genres from folk to pop to country and back again, taking intentional breaks to protect her mental health and creativity, and expanding her artistic practice to include poetry, immersive art, and acting.
But before all her success, she was just a small-town girl, growing up on an Alaskan homestead. At 15, she left home and spent her teenage years hitchhiking across the country and living out of her car. She knew her difficult circumstances meant the odds were stacked against her, and she wondered, was happiness a teachable skill? And as a homeless teenager, she set about finding out. Using writing as a tool, Jewel taught herself mindfulness, long before the term was mainstream, and before she even had the words for what she was doing. Jewel is the ultimate me-searcher, a term we love on the show. And her unwavering commitment to her own happiness and self-discovery has kept her centered throughout her long career. That's why mental health is embedded in everything she does, from her nonprofit, the Inspiring Children Foundation, to her recent immersive art and meditative music project, The Portal.
Today, Jewel shares the story of her mental health journey and the tools that helped her build a deep commitment to well-being. She reflects on the need for intentional career breaks and why she believes creating self-worth unlocks a stock market of magic. Here's Jewel.
I want to just learn a little bit about you. Curious in the last week or so, what's been energizing you?
In the last week,
Yeah.
I've been thinking a lot about navigating the world and how do we navigate life, or how do I specifically navigate life? If there's 5 billion things to pay attention to in a day, why does my mind go to a particular set of things? I think I've navigated my life mostly by looking for problems and then solving problems. But that comes with a kind of heavy cost. It means you notice things that are wrong all the time. It's like if you ever played that game Slug Bug.
Oh
Do
my
you know
God,
that
yes.
game where you're in a car and
Of course.
if you see a Volkswagen bug, then you slug the person next to you. I've never noticed VW bugs until I'm playing that game, and then they're everywhere. And, just with neuroplasticity and the way our brains wire, I've learned to navigate looking for, there's something that's wrong. There's something that's going to be potentially wrong. And learning to rewire that and that impulse it's real work. It takes a real diligence, because it's you're blind to anything else. So it takes a lot of awareness and mindfulness practices and practice.
Yeah. It's funny. I interview a lot of psychologists, and, I'm fascinated by the human brain and human behavior. And one of the people I interviewed he studies happiness at Harvard. And he was saying, we are pothole people, which, in 1,000 miles of beautiful road, we look for the pothole and focus only on that. And he explained that the way that our brains are wired, that's actually the easiest thing for us to do. And to actually come to the point where you decide, where you're okay, I'm actually going to just look at the things that are good, to your point, does take work. But actually it feels so good when you can put yourself on that upward spiral instead of the downward one.
Yeah, both things are true. It's just which one do you want to experience? It's like when you ride a bicycle. If you're looking at the rock in the road, you're going to hit the rock in the road. You go where you look.
Yeah, exactly. So talk to me about, I know that, you've had such a wild career and done so many different things. At this point in your life and in your career, what is the intention behind the work that you're doing?
My intention has always been to grow as a human. I moved out at 15 and knew that statistically that was a bad idea, that the movie doesn't end well for kids like me. Had an alcoholic dad. He, was repeating cycles of abuse. And I realized that as much as I had a genetic inheritance that would give me a predisposition to diabetes or heart disease, I had an emotional inheritance, and it was going to give me a predisposition to abuse, cycles of addiction, a myriad of things. And it was like an emotional language I was already taught. By 15, I had learned this language. It was going to lead to a pretty unhappy outcome, because it kind of had in my family generationally. And so I felt like my job was to learn a new emotional language, to learn a new way of relating to the world. And I thought that was interesting. I didn't know how to do it, but I felt like at least I knew what my assignment was. And I was around, is happiness a learnable skill? Is it a teachable skill? If happiness wasn't taught in my home, was there just no hope for me? Misery is very efficient. It's an equal opportunist. It doesn't care if you're rich or white or black or poor. But if you're going to learn to relate to the world differently, if you're going to learn a new emotional language, that costs money, because it's education. And so I had to figure out a way to re-educate myself without those traditional resources. And so when I set out on my life, everything was an extension of this curiosity that was, again, putting happiness first. And so I made that my number one job. My number two job was to be a musician. And under that, I wanted to be an artist more than famous. Anchoring myself into that type of plan really helped me. And I'm very proud to say I'm 50 now, and I have maintained that promise to myself. It never wasn't my number one priority. And that is why I took years between albums. It's actually why I switched genres. It's why I even switch what types of art I make or do, is because those things make me happier, even though they're risks, or maybe not even as smart business-wise. They're things that keep me alive and fresh, which I think ultimately over a long career arc will lead to better success.
Can you take me back a little bit? I would love to hear a little more of the backstory of your childhood and your experience.
I was raised on a homestead by immigrants. My grandmother and grandfather helped settle Alaska when it was a territory still. My father and his 8 siblings were varyingly born either in Alaska or in Switzerland. Was raised living off the land, no running water, no electricity. We only ate what we could kill or can. It was extraordinary, raised by extraordinary. My mom left when I was really young, but my aunts were just very heroic women. They would shoe their own horses, build their own cabins. I was never taught that my gender would affect my intellectual capacity to handle my life. I was expected to figure things out, on the farm, fixing tractors. I was taught that I was capable. And I didn't know, like down here in the States, that women aren't always taught the same things. So even though I had some things working against me in life, I also had that working for me.
Even with your upbringing, you sharing about the gender piece, it's just it sounds like a small thing, but that can completely change the way that you live your life and, what's wired in you and what you believe about what's possible for you. And of course, I'm sure that there were obviously hardships, but also it sounds like the way that you've oriented toward the world, even from a young age, has been like really empowered.
I don't know if it was empowered. Growing up, it didn't feel that way. But looking back, I never wanted to risk somebody else not saving me. That felt dangerous and improbable. And so I had to, I think when, really my life changed was every time I've looked in the mirror and said, what am I willing to do about it? Am I coming for me? Am I going to save me? Am I going to do something about this? And realizing that fair doesn't really factor in. Life really isn't fair, but what do I want to do about it? And if I'm not willing to do something about it, then I better stop complaining. If you want to settle, that's fine, but you don't get to complain anymore. And I didn't want to settle. I wanted to grow and learn and become better. And that meant I had to be willing to do something about it. And in my life, those choices had to be very extreme. Moving out of 15 is really extreme. I ended up homeless because I wouldn't have sex with the boss. That's a really extreme position to be in because I knew I wouldn't be able to pay my rent and I knew I'd get kicked out and I knew I'd be living in my car. But investing in my character, every time I've chosen to invest in my humanity, believe in my humanity at tremendous cost, it was like investing in a stock market of magic. I saved up, this character currency. And it hurt. It was painful. It caused painful things in my life, like moving out or, being homeless or those things. But it ended up paying dividends in absolute magic. I ended up, when I was homeless, to stop shoplifting, I started writing songs to swap behaviors. And then I became a prolific writer. And then I got discovered. And none of it was planned. It was just, again, that like stock market of magic.
I love that that visual, that stock market of magic. So, okay, obviously music has been a huge part of your life. I'm curious, like when did it first show up in your life?
It was a family business. My mom and dad sang in hotels for tourists. And so me and my 2 brothers helped out with that show. When my mom left when I was 8, my dad and I became a duet. I was definitely, of me and my brothers, the one that enjoyed it to the point that I would put up with these 5-hour practice sessions, and it's pretty intense. But I never thought it could be a real job or a real career. I was pretty realistic my whole life. Like I was a little kid in Alaska. Like it never even dawned on me to dream that I could be a professional musician. I just liked it. Even though I went to an amazing school later, I got a scholarship to a fine arts school, but nobody talked to me about college or career opportunities. And so, when I graduated high school, I just thought that was it. And I got a job answering phones in a computer warehouse and just a bunch of dead-end jobs. And I went back to singing just because that's how I was raised. We bar sang and we got $200. It really wasn't until I started to watch the reaction in the coffee shop. I could tell something was happening. I could tell something special was happening. It felt special. It felt magical. Later, when I got discovered, I was homeless. I was 18. I almost didn't sign my record deal because I didn't think somebody with my emotional background could ever handle fame. I just knew to be very afraid of it. Fame doesn't work out. Like statistically, I don't know how everybody thinks so optimistically that they're going to be famous. It's like drug addicts. They're going to be the one, person that's not going to hurt. Mm-hmm. Fame looked very dangerous to me because I was offered $1 million signing bonus as a kid. But, I grew up horse trading, grew up on a ranch. Like nothing is free. So why would somebody give me $1 million? Like, what was the catch?
Mm-hmm.
So I went to a local public library and asked if they had any books on the music business. And there was one book called Everything You Need to Know About the Music Business. So I printed it and learned about the contracts and how they're structured. And that basically this was $1 million loan payable against record sales. And then when I saw how splitting, the artist's share of an album, the amount of records I'd have to sell to break even were astronomical. So I knew that the odds were just very, very against me. And so I was willing to assume that the bidding war was really about competing with other labels. It probably wasn't about how talented I may or may not be. And that it would behoove me to not get caught up in that and to really think about what I needed, what I wanted, and what would help me succeed. And again, that comes back to my goals. I wanted to be an artist more than I wanted to be famous. I wanted a career. I didn't need $1 million advance. And so I got very clear about what I did need. I needed rent money, which was small. I didn't need a lot. And then I took the biggest back end anybody had ever been given. So the biggest royalty mechanical rate. And then we built it in a stepped manner so that for every 1 million albums I may or may not sell, I would get a higher and higher percent. And so that's the deal we struck. It was scary because I was like, maybe I should have taken the money. But at the same time, it kept me from getting dropped and allowed me the opportunity to keep fighting to break my career on my terms.
Wow. So this is what I mean when I say like maybe the word isn't empowered, but there's definitely something about you that from a young age, I'm like, how many people would say, I know the risks of leaving home at 15, but I'm going to choose to do it anyway. Or, gosh, how many people would say, I'll take that $1 million bonus and not actually spend time thinking about what this could mean and what it could mean for my future. I think there's something, in you that maybe makes you pause. Or I've heard you talk about like, your nature versus your nurture. Like, what do you make of that? Because it does feel distinctly different from, I think, a lot of what the general population might do, or at least think they would do.
I don't know. I didn't spend my youth feeling empowered. I just spent my youth feeling scared. But going forward anyway, and then trying to make decisions that wouldn't hurt me.
Yeah.
And not that I succeeded all the time. I made plenty of dumb choices, but trying to be thoughtful, promising myself, like I promised when I was 8 not to drink or do drugs, because I knew watching drunks in bars that I'd probably never get out of it. I knew there was something in me that was so hurting and so in so much pain that I probably, if I ever did drink or do drugs, would never get out from under that. Like I knew enough to be scared. I knew enough when to be scared. And so tried to come up with strategies. And I think maybe being raised in nature, without television, without, distractions, I had a lot of time to think. I learned to enjoy being thoughtful, pausing. When I wrote, it was like everything would get quiet and I would see patterns. And I learned to find that an enjoyable experience. And it ended up being, today what you'd call just like a really healthy coping mechanism, I guess.
So talk to me about, shoplifting and then replacing that with songwriting. Like, tell me a little bit more about having this experience of being addicted to shoplifting and then doing more songwriting and getting discovered.
Yeah, I'd say, so I moved to San Diego to take care of my mom who was sick, series of dead-end jobs, got propositioned by the boss, started living in my car got stolen. It's very tiring being homeless. I don't think people realize it's kind of like you think, oh, that person's doing nothing all day, but surviving all day is really exhausting. Trying to stay safe on the street is hard. Trying to eat when you don't have food, it's just exhausting. And then the amount of fear that you have, obviously, is really tiring. I started shoplifting probably around then, probably a little before I was homeless. At first, I thought of it as just caring for myself. It was mostly food. And then it started to extend into other things that were just comforting. Like I remember stealing a Christmas present for myself, a dress, and putting it under a Christmas tree so that I'd have a present for myself when I was 16.
Oh, wow.
Things like that were like, I guess, ways of me managing being alone. And when I was homeless, it really escalated. And I realized I was going to end up in jail or dead if I didn't do something about it. And I remembered this Stoic quote. It was like, happiness doesn't depend on who you are or what you have. It depends on what you think. And it was disappointing to at 15, I moved out and I didn't want to be a statistic. And then you flash forward 3 years, I'm 18 and I'm homeless and shoplifting. Like, I'm a statistic. It was such a bummer I tried to be so thoughtful about not being a statistic, and I still ended up being one. It was a real, big moment for me. And so the Stoic quote, I was like, what if I could turn my life around one thought at a time? The problem is I couldn't tell what I was thinking. Today, I would call it disassociative, but I didn't know that word. I just knew that I couldn't witness my thoughts in real time, which is a real problem if your only life plan is to change your life one thought at a time.
Through your thoughts.
So that was the first thing I had to solve for. And as I thought about it and pondered, I realized my hands are the servants of my thought. And if I want to know what I'm thinking, watch what I'm doing. And so maybe if I could watch what my hands did all day, I could figure out what I was thinking. So my huge life plan was just write down everything my hands did for 2 weeks or a month. I had no idea what I was doing. I was just still stealing. Whatever I did though, I wrote it down. Opened a door, wrote it down. Washed my hands, wrote it down. Somebody tried to shake my hands and I wouldn't. I wrote it down. At the end, I looked at my data and was trying to get a takeaway. I had no idea what I was looking for. And I was like, wait a minute, I haven't had a panic attack in 2 weeks. It was like a clinical trial, glaucoma medicine makes your eyelashes grow. It's like a weird side effect. And they're like, wait a minute.
Right.
That's what it was like. I was like, what have I stumbled on? What happened? What about me watching my hands made me not have a panic attack? What I stumbled onto is today what we would call mindfulness. I was so absorbed in the present moment that I actually was kind of able to relax because I had one simple job, and it was watch my hands all day. And so that started a process for me where I started to realize my behavior drove life. And if I could change my behavior, I could change my life. You can't just quit an addiction. It's very hard. You could white knuckle it. But even then, I couldn't just quit stealing. There was something about stealing I really needed. I was powerless to it. I didn't understand what that was, but I realized I couldn't just not do it. And so it took a long time of building awareness where I would I call it waking up after I stole. I was like, oh my God, I did it again. Then I'd kind of become aware during stealing, but I couldn't stop it. Then I started to become aware with the urge to steal, but it was too late. I was going to do it. It took about 6 months to build the awareness to see the urge far enough in advance that I actually had a shot where I wasn't triggered. It was at a manageable level where then I could actually replace with a different behavior, which was writing for me, except I actually hated writing in that moment. So why is that? What I realized is we have two basic states of being, dilated and contracted. And stealing isn't as much a stealing addiction as it is an intensity addiction. And it was my way of managing stress. So imagine you have a faucet in your kitchen is leaking and you turn the radio on. It's like you don't hear the faucet anymore. So self-harming, sex addiction, all kinds of things like that are intensity addictions. They're ways of managing anxiety. And writing didn't help me cover up my anxiety. It actually helped me think about my anxiety, which didn't feel great. And so again, I had to reorient myself to dilating, right? Writing is calming, it's relaxing, it's dilating. It causes you to move toward a feeling. It doesn't cause you to distract yourself from a feeling. And so I had to learn to orient myself because each of these physiological states elicit a biochemical response, right? So if you steal, you're getting an excitatory chemical response. You're getting a drug hit, even though it's just in your own body. Writing was a very different neurochemical response, and I had to orient myself to feeling that was a reward when I was in a triggered state.
Wow. And so this is what leads you to more of the writing of songs and then being discovered eventually because you went back to the thing you started with, which was music.
Yeah, it's funny. I didn't start writing a ton to get discovered. I started writing a ton as a behavioral exercise, basically. And to be honest, I wanted to be less lonely, which means you better tell the truth. Because when you lie about yourself, you're never going to feel seen. And so I decided to start taking that risk in my writing and telling the truth and being, pretty radically vulnerable. And it led to a really satisfying experience on stage where I did feel seen and I did feel understood.
After the break, Jewel shares how she's avoided burnout, plus the tools and strategies she uses for self-reflection. We'll be right back with more from Jewel. And we're back with Jewel.
You're giving us a window into the way that you think, and the way that you sort of show up in the world. But I'm curious, I mentioned this earlier, and I think in general, whether it be with music or anything else, that so many of us, and I do think this is a Western challenge, get really caught up in this idea of having to be successful, needing to be famous, which you said earlier. It's like, that's a trap. How do we still all want to be famous? All of these things that we get caught up in that we also know, through research that they've done in psychology, but also I think in just like anecdotal conversations, that they don't lead us to happiness. They don't. But we continue to chase them. I'm curious, like, what really kept you from doing that? And you've talked about, changing genres. I know you also took a break to raise your son. Like, what has kept you from jumping in there with everybody else? And I'm curious, actually, what advice you'd have for people who feel like, oh, I'm an overachiever, or I'm in the rat race.
Even though we know that fame or money, and we hear it over and over, you can still be miserable famous. If you just look statistically, the people that kill themselves, in this industry is very high. Drug addicts, very high, like drug use in this industry. So why do we keep pursuing it? It's because what we really want is to feel worthy. We really want to feel like we belong. We are ill. Our society is ill. We don't understand our worth or our value. And for generations now, it's like living in a soil that's depleted. For generations, we have been pursuing the intellect. We have been pursuing success, for hundreds of years now. And our emotional systems have atrophied in our society in our pursuit of intellectual and career greatness. And we suffered for it. And most kids grow up not feeling inherently worthy. And that's intolerable. It is intolerable psychologically to not feel worthy, to not know or understand that you belong. And you want to. It is a tremendous urge. And so that drives us, even though we know that what we're doing may or may not lead to that outcome. Learning to heal worthiness is a whole other ball of wax. You can't outrun the pain. You just can't. There's no shortcut. The quickest way is through. So for me, I tried to stay away from things that at least I was able to identify as pitfalls or traps, and focus on getting to the hard work, which is like, why do I feel like such a piece of shit all the time? Why was I so neglected? And was that me? Am I so unworthy of love that neither of my parents took care of me? It was a long, long road. It's still a long road. I find healing self-worth to sort of be this spiraling thing, where we come back to the same issue quite a lot, but it's not the same. We've spiraled up. Healing is this spiral. Yeah, we keep touching into these core issues for us, and we might the rest of our life, but it is changing and it is growing. With my career, I felt like it was always secondary to, I call this good work. This is good hard work. This process of discovery, everything, it's the spring water, it's the headwater that everything flows from. And so my songwriting is downriver of this spring well of discovery. My drawing, my parenting, my partnering, my career are all downriver. And so if I focus really intentfully and intensely on the spring water, everything downstream should benefit. And so for me, it was just trying to invest my emotional energy and my emotional capital where I thought it would pay the biggest dividends. And that meant going against the norms a lot. I had to go against conventional wisdom. I've never done things the right way. I've never done things the normal way. I've always been an outsider that's done things in an odd way. But there's a path for anyone. You have to find your own authentic way forward in your life. And then kind of magical things against that stock market of magic kind of magical things happen as a side effect of that. But it takes a stubbornness. But at least your stubbornness is working in a good way for you.
Correct.
Like channeling that stubbornness in a healthy way versus just, pointless rebellion. And, it meant like after Hands, my second album was, my first album was a success. My second one was a success. And then I quit because it didn't work for me. My career worked. The music worked. I was super thankful. But I got really famous. Like, death threats 24/7, can't walk across the street, famous. And I didn't like it. It made me deeply unhappy. And it was confusing because I worked so hard to get there. But I had to just come to terms with the fact that it didn't agree with me, even though the whole world was like, you did it, keep going. I was exhausted and unhappy. And so I gave myself permission to never do it again. I gave myself as long as it took. It ended up being about 2 years to see if there's something else I wanted to do, like photography or cooking or something else. I was young. I was 22, maybe. Too young to just never work again. But financially capable of never working again. Like it was weird. What I realized that I actually really loved music. I loved it. I actually just didn't like being that famous. And in the amount of 2 years that I quit, my fame dropped a lot. I was able to, by the end of that 2 years, go grocery shopping without a bodyguard. I was like, oh, got it. I actually just don't like this level of fame, but I can handle this level of fame. And so I actually need to manage the pace of my career in a very different way. And what the industry tells you is you better just get up as high as you can and stay there.
Keep going. Yeah.
That's anti-nature. And I really need people to hear that if you are in conflict with nature, nature will win. You will exhaust yourself trying to beat nature. And I love capitalism. I love business. I love my career. But I don't want to pit myself against nature. And if we think that our careers are going to do this all the time on some skyrocketing graph, you're just in for a rough ride. Because the price you're going to pay to keep that type of graph going is probably with your health. It's probably with all of your relationships. You will pay the price to rob something so that this one thing can unnaturally grow. I'm part of nature, and I wanted to be part of cycles. There's winter, there's fallow seasons. I had to have fallow seasons. I'm a writer. I have to have quiet. I can't just make oranges. Like if I'm a tree, I can't make fruit all the time. I have to grow without fruit. There's a reason nature has the cycles it does. And I decided to put myself in harmony with that as much as I could so that I could choose my sanity and figure out how to heal.
Wow. Okay. So the anti-nature piece is really powerful to me. I've thought a lot about, all of our lives being cyclical and seasonal and recognizing what season we're in. And not attaching ourselves to an external narrative that says no, if you hit success, you better stay in that season as long as you can. And if you don't, you're in trouble. It's like the threat, right? It puts you in that feeling of okay, I got to fight my way. Like you said, fight my way and stay in and stay seen. I think it's really powerful that you use nature as a way to talk about this, and that you even use a simple analogy like an orange tree, which, nothing can bloom all the time. But we've sort of gone against our own nature, especially in our society, to say, no, if you can bloom, you must stay blooming or you're no longer relevant.
When you are willing to put your self-worth outside of you into other people's hands, you're very easily leveraged. You've given somebody else the key to say, I can get you to behave how I want you to behave, when I want you to behave, because you believe that your value is tied up in your ability to do it. It's just a losing proposition. I want a long career. I want longevity. I care about longevity. I want to be able to create my whole life. And so that means I have to create an environment that allows me this arc where I'm thinking about 60 years and 70 years, whereas the business is just thinking about this profit cycle, this profit cycle, this profit cycle. They're not willing to compromise a quarter or a couple quarters. And so if you're not willing to do that for yourself in your life, nobody else is.
we've talked about happiness and you starting to figure out, like, is this a learnable skill, which we know that, like, optimism and, some of these more positive skills on, like, the mood elevator or some of these more positive emotions are learnable, right? But as you're talking about self-worth, and I'm thinking about this conversation, it sounds like perhaps what you're saying is, like, the best journey we can go on is that journey of discovering our own self-worth.
What's is it Joseph Campbell? The privilege of a lifetime is to be yourself.
Beautiful.
It's a privilege to understand who you are, and our systems are at war. It's an economy of attention. They want our attention, but I need my attention. That's not selfish. That's not being self-centered. It's learning to center myself. It's learning to come from an authentic place in my life. And to do that, I have to be willing to fall in love with myself. If I was to get in a new relationship, I'd give it time. I'd give it resources, right? We wouldn't think like you're going to start dating somebody and you're not going to hang out with them. You're not going to give them your time and the benefit of a doubt here and there. But we really don't give ourselves that time. We don't think, what is the kind of quality time I have set aside to understand who and what I uniquely am in the world? And so developing practices, around that is important. But it isn't a trait, skills that are taught nowadays. Even meditation isn't enough, in my opinion. But understanding what your unique you-ness is takes time and dedication and resources.
Yeah, I mean, and I completely agree. I've been meditating for probably a decade, and while I've found it incredibly powerful, I've also then gone down the rabbit hole of, well, what else do I want to do? And so when you talked about writing, that's something for me that has been life-changing, and I've loved it since I was a kid. And so I didn't really realize that I could use this thing as a way to support my own healing and my own kind of processing of my own life and just what I wanted and who I am and how I change. And I think of it, you put it so beautifully, but I think of it in the same way that you do, that if I can prioritize that, then hopefully everything else that comes into my life, people, careers, whatever, will benefit from the fact that I've chosen to make that important versus putting those other things first and hoping that someday I'll have time for myself, or have time to even consider my own sense of, like, inherent or internal self-worth. I'm curious, for people listening who are going, well, where do you even start on like a journey to figuring out my own self-worth, and how do I know if I think I'm worthy or not? Where would you start?
I think writing is a great tool for anybody. It's not about how well you write. It's about the process of what happens to yourself and your mind. We have a mind, a body, a spirit, a heart. And usually they're all working in 4 different directions. Like while I'm driving my car, I'm thinking about work, but I'm having a heartbreak about my boyfriend. Like just I'm pulled in 4 different directions. Writing causes all 4 of those things to focus and go in the same direction. Anything that helps you do that is worth doing more of. There's a practice that I do as a Native American practice called the hoop practice. Sadly, it's nothing you can learn. It's an oral tradition passed down. I was adopted by Native Americans when I was young. That practice for me has been really, really profound. But the basic idea is that you sit and you contemplate your unique energy. They'd say medicine, your unique way of being in the world. Some people, if they sit and contemplate, like, if I was a natural force, what would I be? Am I a babbling brook? Am I a wind? Am I a crackling fire? Am I fiery? Contemplating things like that is worthwhile. And what's authentic to you might be that you're kind of like a menacing thunderstorm on the edge of the horizon. You don't know if it's going to go left or right. That could be authentic to you, and that's okay. You start to see what kind of self-judgment you have as you start to, realize, are you okay with just a simple visualization like that, for instance?
I love that. I've never heard of that, but that's beautiful. Okay, so Jewel, you've mentioned 2 things that I'm like, oh my God, I'm never going to forget this. The stock market of magic. I'm like, I'm keeping that forever. And the other thing is, of course, this promise you made to yourself, which, gosh, I think we'd all be better off if we could make a promise to ourselves that's authentic to us, but in the same vein that you've done this, which basically means like being true to who you are and true to what you want. What advice do you have for people who want to make a promise to themselves like this, as they're listening to you and hearing your story and going, wow, you've been met with so many moments where you could have broken it, but you chose not to. Like, am I strong enough to do it? And how do I do it?
I think that, healing is hard work, but being dysfunctional is exhausting. And so if you're going to work hard, you might as well work hard in a way that has the possibility for a better outcome. Mm-hmm. Because I know where my dysfunction's leading me. It's never really going to change. It's probably going to get worse. And I hope everybody chooses themselves. I hope everybody chooses their happiness. If you made learning what makes you happy your number one priority in your life, your whole life would change. Now, does that come with serious consequences? It does, because it might mean you have to leave a relationship. It might mean you have to say goodbye to some friends. It might mean that you have to let go of some nasty habits that are really hard to let go of. You might have to be willing to say, I'm going to say no to this job, even though I don't know how to support myself. But again, in those dark moments when it looks like you're losing in the moment, that stock market of magic, it exists and it's real, and not to say you won't go through some pain, but it's going to lead to a much better outcome. And so I just hope everybody feels like taking that risk could be worth it. Because it's kind of, you don't get to choose how life changes. Bad things happen. They're going to keep happening. I participated in self-growth for a while because I thought it was a way of controlling life. If I was very honest about it, I was like, wait, if I heal perfectly, can I never have a problem again? Will I foresee the future and never be betrayed? I definitely participated in my spiritual practices and my self-growth practices because I was just trying to figure out how to game life. It was very hard to realize, bad things happen. I will get wiser. I'll get more discerning. I'll make healthier choices, but bad things are still going to happen. And so if I don't get to choose how life changes, I only get to choose how they change me. And if we can focus our energy there, that actually is within our control, right? We can't control our environment all the time. That's, again, anti-nature. But if I put all of that energy into how do I choose to grow with this? What kind of person do I want to evolve into? Then that's a pretty good use of emotional capital.
Okay, Jewel, I'm going to have you complete these 3 statements for me with anything you want. The first is better humans are?
Evolving all the time.
Better work is?
In alignment with nature.
And a better world has?
A heart-led approach.
Jewel, this has been incredible. What a beautiful story. And you are so obviously such a beautiful soul. So thank you for just sharing yourself and your wisdom here. This has been really wonderful.
Thank you.
That was Jewel, the 4-time Grammy-nominated singer-songwriter and mental health advocate. You can find links to the mental health resources Jewel recommended in the show notes of this episode.
Everyday Better is a production of LinkedIn News. The show is hosted by Leah Smart and produced by me, Grace Rubin.
And me, Emily Reeves.
Asaf Gadron is our sound engineer. Tim Boland mixes our show. We get additional support from Alex Kuznetsova and Ali McPherson. Sarah Storm is our senior producer. Dave Pond is head of production and creative operations. Maya Pope-Chappelle is director of content and audience development. Courtney Koop is head of original programming. And Dan Roth is the editor-in-chief of LinkedIn. Thanks for coming with us, and we'll see you next week.